Visiting Hawaii for a relaxing vacation is probably on everyone's bucket list. The clear water and the breeze can just lighten up your mood and offload all your worries. I don't know about you, but when I go on a trip, I would love to go with my family. It is not only a good way to spend quality time with each other, but also a great way to catch up since everybody is too occupied with their own life. Hello everyone, let's investigate here. Today, we will be talking about how a woman miraculously survived after her car lost control and drove off of a cliff on the Hana Highway. But her identical twin sister wasn't so lucky and lost her life. The woman was later accused of deliberately driving off the cliff and killing her own sister. So what happened? Did she really murder her sister, or was it just an accident? The twin sisters are Allison Dadow and Ann Dadow. They were born in Utica, New York in 1978. They also had an older sister, who is 3 years older than them. When the twin sisters were 5 years old, their mother passed away due to an aneurysm. This is definitely a huge blow to them, and they had no one but each other to rely on. Therefore, they became closer. They spent a lot of time together. They were already twins. Even the way they act was almost identical. It is hard to tell them apart. The twin sister attended Notre Dame High School, and they joined the cheerleader team together. And that is when they were introduced to yoga and completely fell in love with it. The twin sister decided to start their own business. Therefore, they opened their own yoga studio. The business was booming, and the sisters were absolutely thrilled to see that they could turn their passion into business. But later, the business fell off due to poor management. The sisters began to argue and blame each other for the downfall of their business. Over time, they became distant, and sometimes they would even have intense physical fights. But one day, they realized that they only have each other, and they should work on solving the problem, not pointing fingers. The sisters decided to take a break from work and head to Hawaii for a vacation and just focus on rebuilding their relationship. But something horrible happened during the trip. Were there any secrets between the sisters? Let's take a deeper look into the Yoga Twins case. On May 29th, 2016, the sisters were driving an SUV on Hana Highway in Maui. Allison was the driver, and Ann was in the passenger seat. They were driving along the coastline and enjoying the scenery. The Hana Highway has 620 curves and 59 bridges. The road leads you through flourishing rainforests, flowing waterfalls, plunging pools, and dramatic seascapes. This is one of the most beautiful highways in the United States. Even though the scenic views are breathtaking, the roads are actually pretty tough, and sometimes the turns are unpredictable, and oftentimes tourists get into car accidents because they are not too familiar with the roads. Hana Highway is also an older highway, so some parts of the road are just dirt roads and are pretty tough to drive on. You can see the speed limit sign of 10 miles per hour. At first, the sisters were enjoying the view and chatting, but later, for some reason, they began to argue. Next thing you know, the two started to fight each other in the car. Ann started pulling on Allison's hair, and all these happened while they were still driving on the Hana Highway. The car was swerving left to right. Finally, Allison pushed Ann away and regained control of the car. But the car suddenly took a sharp left turn and broke the highway guardrail and drove off of the cliff. The SUV plunged 200 feet off of the cliff, and the car flipped over a couple times before landing on the rock at the seashore. Since there were a lot of cars driving on Hana Highway, a lot of people witnessed this accident. People stopped the car and gathered at the edge of the cliff to see if the sisters survived the crash. They phoned 911 right after when they saw someone in the car was still moving. Police and ambulance arrived at the scene shortly after, and they even deployed a helicopter for the rescue. After sending the survivor to the nearby hospital, the police quickly began their investigation. The car was pretty much demolished after plunging 20 feet off of the cliff. Allison suffered several broken ribs and a broken arm, but she was still able to walk. Allison miraculously survived after this horrible car crash, but her sister, Ann, died from severe head trauma and bleeding. Before the crash, witnesses told the police that there was an intense argument between the two, with one pulling the other's hair. They were driving over the speed limit as well, and the next thing they saw, the car had a sharp left turn and drove off the cliff. The forensics found there were some strands of blonde hair in Ann's hand. This confirmed that Ann was pulling on Allison's hair really hard, otherwise she wouldn't be able to pull off her hair. The police initially came up with the scenario that the two were fighting while driving and resulted in this accident. According to the tire tracks on the dirt road, the car had a sharp left turn and accelerated off the cliff. Allison was essentially saved by the airbags in the steering wheel, but for Ann, when the car was flipping over and over, her head hit the top of the car and her body was yanked multiple times. Later, the research showed that the car did not brake at all. It just accelerated off the cliff. Another thing, how did the car land on the one rock at the seashore? Allison got to be really lucky to be able to land the car there since the area was covered mostly by sea. If she missed by a tiny bit, the car would probably sink and the chance of her surviving would be minimal. Now, did Allison plan all this? It got me thinking, did she purposely choose to drive the car off the cliff and land it on the rock, knowing she would survive because of the airbags? Later, experts determined that there is no way for Allison to see the height of the cliff while she was driving, so it is definitely impossible for her to plan where to land the car. But Maui police did notice that Allison's behavior was quite odd when they first arrived at the scene. She was acting confused and even asked, "Why are the police here?" But it might be the crash had caused some disorientation, but Allison refused to talk to the police. Allison did not even ask about Ann. Almost seems like she was just driving alone and nobody was with her. The alcohol can leave a noticeable smell on the breath, and the police could tell that Allison was driving under influence. The police then performed the blood alcohol content test on Allison, and they found out that the number was 3 times over the limit. After Allison was sent to the hospital, the doctor told her that her sister had passed away due to the car crash. Surprisingly, Allison did not show any signs of sadness. She just sat there, almost feel like she was emotionless. The police later found out that the SUV belongs to Allison's boyfriend, Lonnie Dickerson, and he showed up to the hospital to check on his girlfriend. Right when Allison saw Lonnie, she shouted at him, "You need to shut up, you talk too much. If the police ask you anything, just shut up." This is extremely suspicious. Why did Allison say that? When the father of the twin sister arrived at the hospital, he murmured, "Why? It should have been Allison." Now, is this just a simple car crash? To me, it started to look more like a planned murder. The police then started to investigate the twin sisters. Back in 2008, the sisters opened a yoga studio in Palm Beach, Florida. Palm Beach is a town in South Florida, separated from the mainland by the Lake Worth Lagoon. It's known for its glitzy estates and its beaches. Worth Avenue is lined with upscale boutiques, galleries, and restaurants. The population consists mostly of tourists and upper-class households, where they tend to live a luxurious life. The sisters opened their yoga studio here. At first, their business was booming, and even purchased a Porsche to compliment herself on her success. The yoga studio slowly gained its popularity and was later invited to a reality TV show on ABC. The producer of the show urged the sisters to switch to a bigger location and promised that they would be a regular guest on the show. The sisters thought it was a good idea, not only to boost their popularity, but also to gain more exposure. They switched to a location that is way over their budget, thus increasing their operation costs tremendously. The producer did not live up to his words. He didn't invite the sister back to the show. Therefore, the business went downhill, as they didn't get more customers, and slowly, they could not pay the rent of the studio. In 2014, the sisters had no choice but to close the studio. They didn't notify their employees and customers that they are closing down. they didn't send out paychecks to their employees for the last couple of months and didn't refund the customers who had recharged their memberships. The sisters just took off and owed a total of $100,000. This resulted in a lot of negative reviews on their studio under the Google page. After closing down the studio, the sisters moved to Park City, Utah, and changed their name from Allison Dadow to Alexandria Duval, and Dadow to Anastasia Duval. The reason was that they planned to write a biography. With all the negative reviews flowing around on the internet of their old names will greatly impact the popularity of the biography. The sisters opened another yoga studio in Park City, but in the world of social media, people quickly found out their real names and learned about their past in Palm Beach. Park City is a small city, so the news quickly broke, and of course, the business went south again. The sisters were forced to close down the studio since they owed way too much money. They reached rock bottom and started to drink alcohol to escape reality. The excessive drinking made them alcoholic, and this didn't help them to get their life back together. The sisters were often drunk in public and caused a lot of troubles. In March 2014, Allison was arrested due to driving under influence and hit and run, and even threatened the police who arrested Allison that she would kill him, and she even attacked the police. This resulted in some jail time for Anne. In 2016, the sisters each found a boyfriend. Allison was dating Lonnie Dickerson, and Anne was dating Federico Bailey. Federico stated that the sisters often would fight in the house, not just verbally, but physically, and they looked like they had been in this situation before. Right before the accident happened, Federico invited Anne to camping, and he wanted to spend some alone time with her, so he didn't want Allison and Lonnie to join. At the time, Federico was trying to help Anne to quit drinking, so he didn't want Allison to join on this trip, since he knew she would definitely bring alcohol. Allison found out that Federico and Anne were going on a camping trip, and she wanted to tag along. Anne was a bit upset, but since Allison is her sister, she couldn't refuse. When they arrived at the campground, the sisters started to argue and storm off and just left Federico. After a few hours, the sister came back. They were all happy and it seemed like there were no arguments before. Federico then found out that the sister went to buy alcohol and were drinking already. Their personality completely changes after they start drinking, said Federico. He was really upset because he was trying really hard to help Anne to quit drinking, but she basically gave in again with her sister. He left the sisters, and that was the last time he saw them. Federico recalled that a week prior to the event, Allison said, "I will kill her, and we both will leave this world on the 30th. Anne became nervous, and it was obvious that something was bothering her. She was usually really confident, but she became really skittish. This made me think that maybe Allison planned to kill both her and her sister, but she somehow survived." Federico also said that after Anne passed away, Allison would often wear Anne's clothes and walk around the house when he was around. This made him extremely uncomfortable. Allison became the top suspect, and the police were ready to bring her to court. But Allison knew the police were looking for her, so she booked a ticket to leave Hawaii. On June 3rd, 2016, the police rushed over to the airport and tried to look for Allison. Luckily, Allison's flight was cancelled because there were some hardware problems, so she went to stay at the local hotel. The police finally arrested her at the hotel. Prosecutor says Allison intentionally or knowingly drove off the cliff as her sisters fought in the car. But her defense attorney countered in his opening statement that the fatal wreck was an accident, not murder. The judge later released Allison, as there was not enough evidence. Allison then moved back to New York, where she was arrested again for drunk driving later on. When she was in a police station, she refused to take any photos, provide her fingerprints, or even provide her current address. The Maui police had been trying to look for more evidence. In October 2016, they filed charges again. On November 11th, 2016, Allison was arrested in Albany, New York, and was transported to Hawaii. On January 29, 2018, the trial finally began. Allison was charged with second-degree murder, and if plead guilty, she could end up in 20 years of jail time or life imprisonment. Several witnesses for the prosecution attended the trial. One of the witnesses, Joseph Tolifua, indicated that he heard the sound of an engine while the car was accelerated off the cliff. He also saw the girls fighting each other in the front seats, and the next thing he saw, the car took a sharp left turn and drove off the cliff. Another witness stated that he heard Allison shouting, "We need to call our psychiatrist right now. We need him." Keith Wise, one of Anne's ex-boyfriends, he dated Anne for half a year and also lived with the twin sisters. He stated that the sisters often have verbal arguments and would result in physical fights. One day, he got a call from Anne, and he shouted at him, "Come back right now. I had enough of her. I am going to kill her." When he arrived at their house, he saw shattered bottles and dishes everywhere, and there were even some blood stains on the floor. But what he saw next really baffled him. He saw the sisters sitting on the couch, watching TV and eating snacks, and it seemed like nothing happened. Allison even had a huge cut across her face. Keith asked, "Is everything okay?" The sister replied, "Yeah. We are enjoying the movie. What's wrong?" Keith was really confused. He rushed over because over the phone, Anne sounded furious, and Keith knew her temper. He didn't want to see her do anything stupid. With all these witnesses, the judge announced that Allison pleaded not guilty, as there was not enough evidence to indicate that Allison murdered Anne. Allison's lawyer stated that it was a really tough time for her, as she lost her twin sister in a car crash, and everyone is accusing her of murdering her own sister. This case was closed, and of course, a lot of people were not satisfied with this result. Some people thought the sister had some kind of mental issues, where they would often lose their temper and start fighting each other. And that was exactly what happened right before the crash, and Allison lost her cool and drove her car off the cliff. Some said that Allison was jealous of Anne, and this could explain why Allison showed no emotion after knowing Anne was killed in the car crash, and how she would wear Anne's clothes and walk around the house. Lastly, some people thought that this tragedy was caused by drunk driving, since Allison's alcohol blood content was way too high. When they were still living in Palm Beach, one of their neighbors noted, "I love the Duval sister. They were really nice. But I knew they have a bad drinking habit, and I mean really bad." This statement can prove that alcohol definitely destroyed their life. Later, Allison even attended Dr. Phil's show, where she said that she was really depressed after the accident, and her life wasn't the same afterward. Maybe it was an accident, or maybe it was a planned murder. No one will ever find out, and only Allison knows why she made that sharp left turn and accelerated the car off the cliff.